I wanted nurses not to struggle the way I saw other people struggling, or even with finding non-traditional jobs. I went through a lot of applications over the years trying to land something and never knowing why it didn't stick. It's the part that we need to get more comfortable with.
Thank you so much for being in our podcast, Sarah. I want to welcome Sara Fung into our podcast today, in today's episode. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know most of our audience are nurses. They probably have been in your world too, but for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, how like your journey into nursing?
Thanks so much for having me. I have been a nurse since 2007, so it's been a while. I started out in labor and delivery, actually, and then my bedside career went from there to postpartum to level 3 NICU. I did some non-traditional nursing as well. So I've worked as a prenatal educator. I've worked in a women's gynecology clinic. I've done teaching. And from there, I moved into nursing leadership. So I've worked as a clinical nurse specialist as well as educator, in professional practice. And then about 5 years ago, I started my own podcast called the Gritty Nurse Podcast. And I started the RN Resume helping nurses with their careers. And it's really kind of snowballed from there. So it's been a really great experience. I love connecting with other nurses. I love supporting nurses in general. And I'm really excited because I want people to know how diverse the world of nursing can be, right? Like, it's not just being at the bedside. Of course, if you like bedside, that's great too. But there are so many options out there that nurses don't even know about.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I love that you also mentioned that nursing is so diverse. I think like people, whenever they get into the nursing profession, or people who are like not even the profession, they look at nursing as something that is only confined to like the hospital or clinic. But there's so many things that you can do with nursing, and I'd love for us to kind of talk about that because it seems like you have gone through different specialties, different places in the nursing profession. Now, tell me a little bit about like your journey. Like, have you always wanted to be a nurse?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention earlier that I also wrote a book that came out this year. It's called The
Oh,
Wisdom of Nurses.
mhm.
And in that book, I actually have a whole chapter dedicated to why I became a nurse. And really, it's my initial reason for becoming a nurse was because my mom was a nurse. So my mom was a nurse, and my aunt was also a nurse. And they both told me, don't go into nursing. I went into nursing anyway. So the thing is, like, my mom became a nurse, but she always felt like her English wasn't very good. She was very self-conscious. She didn't like the hours of nursing. And back when she became a nurse, it was only bedside nursing. Really, that was the only choice. And then when she immigrated from the US to Canada, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity. And she actually went into finance. So it's funny that finance is in my family as well. And so she landed in finance and stayed there. But she always said to me, she wished she had done more with her nursing career. And nursing actually taught her a lot about human relationships and how to deal with people. So that was really my journey into going to nursing. And then when I was in high school, I did this careers class, and the two choices came down to nursing and journalism, actually. So it's kind of funny that now I have been an author and I've been doing this sort of journalist stuff. I was able to find a way to bring both of my passions together. And so I think that it's just, everyone has a different reason as to why they got into nursing, but I do think it's a really good career to be in. I know it has been difficult over the past few years, but I don't regret my journey. And I think there's always a way that you can take your nursing skills and knowledge and turn them into something that works for you.
Yeah, growing up, my mom is a nurse too. And then
Okay.
so on the other hand, like she actually like encouraged me to be a nurse, but we're also immigrants from the Philippines. I become a nurse because it's a very lucrative career and all that stuff. I've always wanted to be an author actually when I was younger. Like I wanted to write, but my mom's like, there's no money in writing. There's
Hmm.
no
Hmm.
money in journalism. Like just go nursing. And then once you become a nurse, like you can use your nursing career to pursue what you want to do in life, which in my experience and also looking at your journey, it's really nice to see that you're able to fulfill that, passion using the nursing career, which I tell a lot of my audience that one of the ways that you can build wealth, because most of my platform is really built on finance. One of the ways to build wealth is to optimize your career and leverage your career to build wealth. Now, you had mentioned that you kind of switched jobs throughout the years, and I know job hopping is like one of those things that right now it's more talked about, that before it feels like it's frowned upon. Like my mom growing up, she always tells me that, why can't you keep a job? Like, why can't you stay at like one job for so long? Like, because she stayed in her job for 20 something years. And
Mhm.
I, or on the other hand, like I have switched jobs every two, years. So what are your thoughts about job hopping and how this can be something that you can do to help boost like your career financially, and also like even your growth as a nurse in general?
Yeah, I think that when I went to nursing school, I was told that there was a certain path you go down, which is you graduate, you go into med surge because that's what nurses do when they're new. Then you stay at the hospital for your whole career and then you retire. And it sounds like that's the journey your mom went down.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt from the beginning that I wanted something different. And for a very long time, I felt like there was something wrong with me because from a very early time, I knew that shift work was not going to be for me in the long term, which is why I kept trying to find all these random jobs that were Monday to Friday, like in the clinic and teaching, right? Like I knew that had more of a regular schedule. So I don't think there's anything wrong with job hopping, but I felt like for a long time there was something wrong with me because I would look at my resume and I would see all these jobs. And just like you, it was like for me, 2 years seemed to be the longest I could hang on to any job. Although there was one that I worked, it was like a PRN job. I did that for like 7 years in addition
Mm-hmm.
to all the other jobs I had. But I think that now people are starting to realize that you don't have to stay at the same job for a long time. And it shouldn't be viewed as a negative. I think it's the best way that you can really grow. And in terms of what you said about finances, when you move from one job to another, if it's non-unionized, this is your chance to actually negotiate your salary. And it's probably the most effective way to move up in your salary is by moving jobs and moving organizations and really just using that opportunity to show people what you're worth.
Yeah. I love that because I was the same way. I thought there was something wrong with me too. Like I'm like, is it just because I'm not like content? Is it always like because I always strive to do something else? Do I get bored easily? That kind of stuff. But looking back at my career, it has really helped me like financially. Like now I think with the whole new generation, like a lot of people are realizing that like we really need to look out after ourselves versus tying ourselves down in one company for such a long time. And I know that you started your business, the RN resume, to kind of help nurses like navigate that, moving to different career specialties and all that stuff. When did this start? Because I know most businesses start like from a problem sometimes that we have encountered ourselves.
So I knew from a young age that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I just never knew what that would look like. So the first time I tried to start a business, I actually was I wanted to be like a postpartum doula. So I wanted to help mothers after childbirth in their homes. And I learned a lot from it. But the thing I learned is that I didn't know how to network. I didn't know how to actually like grow because I didn't know how to promote myself. And I
Hmm.
think that's the thing a lot of nurses struggle with is not knowing how to promote themselves because they feel like there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
So I when I went into leadership, I used to sit in a lot of job interviews because I wasn't a manager, but I was often asked to sit in with the manager as a second person. And I
Mhm.
saw a lot of great nurses. I could tell they were great nurses, but they had not so great resumes and not so great interview skills. And on a drive home one day, I thought if only someone had helped them or coach them on it. I think they could have done a lot better. And like I said, I was always looking, trying to figure out business ideas. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could do this. This could be something I help people with. And that's how it really got started, is that I wanted nurses not to struggle the way I saw other people struggling, or even with finding non-traditional jobs. I went through a lot of applications over the years, trying to land something and never knowing why it didn't stick. So that was the other reason why I wanted to help people. So it really just started off on the side of my desk and I didn't have any training. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know what it could be, but over time it just kind of grew and I think nurses really connect with other nurses. So a lot of people will reach out to me because I'm a nurse. And I'm sure the same with you. There's this level of camaraderie and trust that we understand each other and we understand the world of nursing and we can help each other.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know that there's a lot of like great nurses out there that don't necessarily like reflect a lot about like I mean like in their resumes. So sometimes like some companies like they miss out, some hospitals they miss out on great nurses just because of that initial cover letter. Now, I I've used the same resume template for like the last like 14 years that I've been a nurse. And I think that a big part too with how I get into like jobs is also networking. So you mentioned like networking is very, very, important. But as somebody, I'm an introvert. I don't know if you're an introvert, but like definitely networking is one of those things that makes me kind of like nervous, like makes like just the
Hmm.
word networking
Hmm.
itself makes me nervous. But now looking at where you're at now, like you grew so big in LinkedIn. And if you guys don't know what LinkedIn is, kind of like a social media platform, but more for like professional. It's very like formal, like professional. Like I'm not versed in LinkedIn. Tell me a little bit about how networking has helped you throughout this years that, in your career as a nurse and also as a business owner.
Well, I think, first of all, when we think of the word networking, I picture being in a big room with people
Mm-hmm.
and having to awkwardly go up and make conversation, and everybody's dressed in suits and we're, drinking whatever. But that's just one form of networking. I think in this day and age, we're in 2024, a lot of networking now is done online. So it's not like you have to go to these awkward mixers or conferences or whatever. You can actually do it online. And so, yes, LinkedIn is a really big part of my business and how I grew. And LinkedIn is, I think, a platform that every nurse should be on, whether or not you're looking for a job. You want to have a professional presence, you want to have a digital footprint. Whenever you apply for jobs these days, even if you don't, we're always Googling each other, right? Like, I'm sure you Googled me or I Googled you before we even got on this call. And when you Google yourself, you want something to come up that's within your control. And
Mm-hmm.
your professional platform is something you can control and you can write the narrative how you want. So I think LinkedIn is definitely a very good place to network. And, people might think, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Right. So it could be something as simple as reading somebody's post, liking it, sharing it, commenting on it. It could be something like that simple. It could be making a connection request, which is basically like a friend request on LinkedIn and sending someone a direct message, right? So that's a form of networking. It could be joining an online webinar and participating in the conversation. So networking can look a lot of different ways, or something like what you and I do, which is we just post on social media platforms and we start to gain somewhat of a following and be known for something. So networking can be all these different things. Like without social media, we wouldn't have found each other. I'm sure we never would cross paths or meet face to face, but that doesn't mean we didn't make a connection. So I think networking is something like that. It could be just, asking people if they know of a job opportunity. So word of mouth is still really big. It can be lots of different things. And I'm an introvert as well, whether people know it or not. I think I'm more of like an extroverted introvert. So I
Yeah.
can kind of put myself out there, but then I get
Mm-hmm.
really tired. And
Yeah.
so you don't have to be an extrovert to be able to network. You just have to know how to make connections with people that are meaningful.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that too, because I'm also the same way, an extroverted introvert that I could actually put myself out there. I could speak and like a class and all that stuff, but that drains me out. But doesn't mean that you don't need to find connections with other people who are doing the same things as you or who you resonate with as far as like, what you value and all that stuff when you're in your nursing career. Now, going back, I know that we kind of went off tangent because I really want to get into the RN resume. What do you say is like the most common type of clients that you get? Are they typically like new grad nurses or like people who are just like wanting to like find different jobs somewhere or
Yeah, it's usually it's nurses that I would say are early or mid-career that are looking for their first job out of Bedside. So that's what I've been noticing because I started my business in 2019, right before the pandemic hit. So that's usually who will come to me. And usually they're coming looking for resume help, which is quite common. And I hear a lot of times from nurses, I've been at the bedside for 10, 15, even 20 years. I've never really had to look for a job before, which is really common because maybe you just move from one unit to another, you have an interview, but you more or less know you're going to get the job. It's just for formality. So leaving bedside is a big challenge for nurses because they don't know how to do it. They don't know what jobs they could get. They also don't know what the day-to-day could look like in a
Mhm.
non-bedside job. So I help them with that. And through that, I think people start to realize there's more to job searching than just the resume. So then I talk to them about LinkedIn, about networking, about job interview coaching, because some people are just really nervous when it comes to interviewing. I talk to them even about career coaching because maybe you want to leave the bedside, but you have no idea what you could do or what you would want to do. So getting some clarity on your next step is also really important. So it's like the resume is what everyone knows, but there's actually a lot more to a job search
Yeah.
than just the resume, right? So
Yeah.
like for example, I got hired as a camp nurse because I knew someone and they were basically like, I want you to do this job and just go to the interview. But I
Yeah.
didn't have to look for a job posting. I didn't have to do any of that. It was like through the power of networking that it kind of landed in my lap.
Yeah, networking is so powerful, and you're right that like finding jobs, landing jobs is more than just a resume. It's just like one part of it, along with like how great of a nurse you are with present and actually presenting that in a way that, the hospital or the clinic you're applying at could see that. Nice that you mentioned also that it's the whole package, like even interviews and all that stuff. Now, do you do like interview coaching? Like you teach them like what they should be answering like for specific interviews?
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? Because a lot of nurses, like everything that we're talking about, I never learned in nursing school and I didn't learn on the job. It was just through a lot of trial and error that I figured out, oh, this works or this doesn't work. And so with the interview coaching too, it's like I coach nurses on general and also specific interview tips. So general interview coaching could be like, let's talk about how to answer questions about your weaknesses or how to
Mm,
answer questions about conflict, which are two very difficult areas for nurses. Or, this is how you prepare for a Zoom interview because a lot of nurses might not have done interviews really for a long time. And then there's specific interview prep. Like if you have an actual interview lined up, then we can look at all the potential questions you may be asked for a particular unit or particular type of job and just like work through that. And I think a big thing is also how to be confident in an interview because if you think about it, the words you're saying are just part of it, right? It's like how do you present yourself, your body language, your tone, all of that makes a difference in how people remember you. And also, because I used to sit in a lot of interviews, I would say one of the things is make sure you actually answer the question. And when you start to spiral, right, you may get nervous and like a lot of times because I was on an interview panel and we had like a rubric that we had to score people, we were like, so what was the answer? We don't even know what the answer was, and it wasn't related to the question. So sometimes spiraling is something we work on, like how to keep it to the topic, or if you start to get nervous, how to bring yourself back and center yourself in the middle of an interview.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that is so helpful. I wish I had that like before when I was like a new grad, like in my new grad, like years. I had mentioned earlier that I switch jobs every 2 years. Like this last job that I had, I've had it for like 5 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that's the longest I've ever like stayed in a job. And that's because like I really like my job. I'm content and like, I know I could be making more somewhere else, but like I love what I do. I love my coworkers. But like definitely like even interviewing, even like the resume and all that stuff, it's like a skill. And now that I haven't really done it in the last 5 years, I felt like I don't have it anymore. So, like that being said, interviewing this RN and even confidence, would you say it's like a skill that can be learned over and over and something that
Yeah. Yeah, I would say like I was thinking in my head today even about confidence and what is it like how can we increase our own confidence? And I think a lot of it is like working on your inner thoughts because a lot of times Like we're both nurses, we're both women, people of color, parents. We think that because we don't fit a certain mold that we're not good enough. So telling yourself you're not good enough, that you don't have enough experience, that this and that, I think you need to change how you talk to yourself. It's like, I am good enough. I have a lot of experience. I can learn things quickly. I am a nurse and I literally save lives, so I can do this. And it's like that inner voice that you have, and if you talk to yourself in a different way, then you start to project confidence. And I know that not every nurse is a woman, but like I think this is a woman problem that we just put ourselves down. And with nursing, we put each other down. So it's really hard sometimes to break out of that mentality. But if you realize that like a lot of the problem is sometimes how you view yourself and not really other people, then that might change how you present yourself when you're
Yeah.
looking for jobs.
That is so crazy. It's so fascinating how our minds work and how our brains work. Because that's one of the things that I also see a lot is that self-doubt and like really like people could say so many things about you or like they could give you opinions about you, but at the end of the day, sometimes like it's how we think about ourselves that matters the most that will really determine how confident we could like look in front of other people. Speaking of confidence, I know that you are a keynote speaker like for the National Speakers Bureau. I that is and speaking of confidence, it's just crazy that you're talking about like having the skill of like appearing confident. Now, speaking, tell me about that. Like, because I have a big admiration for speakers because to me, it's just one of those things that requires a lot of confidence. How did you get into speaking?
Actually kind of funny because like I was so shy in kindergarten that I wouldn't speak, and my parents had to send me for a hearing test because I wouldn't speak. So I tell people I went from that to being a speaker, but it was a long journey, right? So in the book that I wrote, I talk about how I did it's a lot of practice, right? So in high school, I did the morning announcements, and I don't know why I did it, but I did. So I would read the morning announcements to the whole class or the whole school, and this is where I was like, oh, maybe I could be a journalist. But just like you, I was told to do something more practical and something that would make me a good salary. So I kind of put that off to the side. And then about 5 years ago, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to start a podcast. So then it was more practice speaking, right? But it was speaking to nobody. It was just speaking to a wall, right? Because you don't get the feedback. So it went from there to doing media. So we did a lot of media during the pandemic because nurses were being asked what we thought. So from there, it was like, then we started doing speaking, but it was virtual because of the pandemic. And then from there, it went to doing in person, right? So like there was a big progression into how I got to where I was. But the main thing was I just kept saying yes to everything that seemed like it was an opportunity. And I guess over time, I started to realize that, okay, no, I can do this. And sometimes I still struggle with how I sound on my podcast, or I say too much, or I say too much. But it's just knowing that if you keep going, people are connecting with you. So I hardly ever hear people say that I made a mistake doing something, right? It's more about the message that I'm giving. And so I don't want people to think that if you don't look or sound a certain way that you can't do this, right? Everybody can make a podcast, and you've done a podcast, you know how hard it is. You have to be consistent. You have to have content all the time. And so it's not easy, but I would say it's worth it. And if you have like a specific niche, then that also really helps because people know you for a certain thing, and that's what you can go on. And just being a nurse could be a niche in itself, that you have nursing knowledge and expertise, even though you feel like you're only a nurse, you actually have a lot of skill that people don't have. So that was kind of my journey into speaking, and I'm excited to see where it could go next. I don't know, but I'm always open to new opportunities and
Yeah.
seeing, how I can be a better speaker or how I can have more knowledge in certain areas.
Wow. That is such a great, like, listening to that is so inspiring. It's such a great journey and also a testament that, things don't happen overnight. Like you had mentioned, you started with this and then it went to this and then it went to this. And, like a lot of people actually, like, when they see me or like people who have had, like some success, like I wouldn't really, like not bragging or anything. They always think that this is something that happened overnight. It's something that happened so fast because that's what is portrayed online. But then they don't see what was on the back end, what happened in the last 5, 10 years getting up to that point. And I love that you said that you just started saying yes to opportunities, and I think that's like a really key too of like doing really good at what you do, because the more that you do something, the more you can see where you can iterate and where you can get better at. And I love your whole journey. Now you also mentioned that nurses don't realize that throughout their career they build skills. There,
Hmm.
that's where I was going. They build skills that they could use for something else, right? Like
Hmm.
outside of like working bedside. And I think this is like such a great like example that you don't have to stay bedside if that's something that you don't enjoy. Although I always say that we need bedside nurses. Like I don't want everybody
Hmm.
to just leave bedside just because if you like what you do at bedside, that's really great. Like we need more of you. But yeah, like transitioning from, are you still working bedside right now?
So I am not
Or
working
like
bedside,
or
but
clinical?
I do camp nursing every summer, so I'm still doing
Oh.
some direct patient contact, but I'm not working full time in a hospital, no.
Oh.
So that was a whole gradual transition as well. And a lot of people, so a lot of nurses, but a lot of people outside of nursing too, they think that if you're not bedside, that you're not a real nurse. So I want people to get that out of your head that you are a nurse, whether or not you're touching patients every day. Every single nurse I know who is either away from bedside or has left nursing altogether for a different career still uses their knowledge, skill, and judgment every single day. Like we interviewed a nurse who became a lawyer on our podcast, and I asked her, "Do you still use your nursing knowledge?" She said every single day because now she's a lawyer for personal injury. So when she asks
Oh.
questions like, she'll ask like, when you hit the car, did your coffee spill? And people don't know why they would ask that, but she's like, well, that helps me determine how hard the impact is. And I used to have a lot of trauma patients. And so this is her using that skill every single day. So, it's just like there's so much there that I think nurses don't realize. And sometimes we downplay our accomplishments, or we think that, oh, because I was an ICU nurse, people know I did this. It's like, but they don't unless you say it, right? And usually when someone looks at your resume, they may not have a healthcare background, they may be an HR person. So unless you actually spell it out, it's not obvious. And so this is the part that we need to get more comfortable with, is actually like saying what it is we do and realizing that there's a lot more. And I just want people to not say you're just a nurse and you're only a nurse, because there's so much to being a nurse that we kind of just forget because maybe you don't feel appreciated on the job or your work is difficult, but it's really just something that's so unique, right, to
Yeah.
nursing.
Oh my gosh, yes. I also had like a nurse that I interviewed before who's doing medical sales. She transitioned from being like a bedside nurse to doing medical sales. Her name's Jeannie. And she told me the same thing, that like she deals with a lot of people working in the hospital, that she can actually relate to them more because she had that nursing background. She knows how to kind of sell things better to like, like medical supplies, because she knows like what they're going to be good for. And I think that that idea of like not being a real nurse just because you don't do patient care is something that is so outdated and needs to like be thrown out of the window. Because
Hmm.
once you become a nurse, you're a nurse, like everywhere you go you're a nurse. And this also applies to people who switch careers later on, because the things that you learn in nursing along, like especially if you also had that bedside experience, will be with you until forever. Like right now I still do patient care, I still work in the clinic, but I'm kind of transitioning to like business ownership. And I mainly talk about money and finance, and I know how financial health is so important to our patients. I see so many patients who are underserved, who don't get the care that they need because of money, like, or even like basic necessities like food, like even like being able to like exercise or like have like a home, like and all those things really affect their health, like in general, physical health, emotional health, mental health, most especially. So I think that that nursing background and being able to see people holistically like really helps me become more aware that money is not just money, right? Like there's so
Hmm.
many aspects of it that really affects like a person. Now, so you wrote, I know you mentioned earlier about the book that you wrote, Wisdom of Nurses. What inspired you to write this book?
I always wanted to write a book. So what happened was like because we did this media segment, someone that was a literary agent reached out to us and was like, "Hey, are you interested in writing a book?" But I had actually wanted to write a book for a long time before that, but I just wasn't sure what it should be about or what it should look like. So I always wanted to write a book because, like, I think books have a longer shelf life than social media. With social media, people forget about you so quick. It could just be like a week. If you don't post anything, people don't remember you exist. So with a book, I feel like there's a much longer shelf life, like years from now my book will still be around. And I always think about like, what am I going to leave behind for my kids?
Mm.
So I know this is morbid, but I'm like, if I were to die tomorrow, what's going to be left behind? I have my podcast, but what I learned about the podcast is if you stop paying for the platform, they could take your episodes down. And that scared the crap out of me. But I'm like, okay, well, with the book, this will be around forever. And this is something I can leave for them so they can understand me and my journey a little bit more and also connecting with more people on a broader level because there are people that listen to podcasts and go on social media and there are people that don't. But the book seems to be something that's a universal medium because you could pick up the hard copy, you could listen to the audiobook, you could get the ebook. And so I thought this is something like a gift that I can give not just nurses, but other people to understand what it is that nurses actually do. And I still think there are a lot of people that don't know what we do, even at the bedside. So, like, my preceptor, when I was in nursing school, she worked mainly night shifts in the labor and delivery unit, and her son, who was 15, actually thought she slept on her night shifts. He thought she slept every single night shift. So her own son didn't even know what she did. And she's like, "No, I'm delivering babies all night. That's what I do. And that's why I have to come home and sleep during the day." So I think just getting back to your question, the book was just meant to be just something that's longer lasting and more impact to more people.
A legacy, like something
Mhm.
that you want to leave. And I love books. Like I consume so many books and you're so right. And the thing with books too, it's that it's more accessible to a lot of people, like people who don't have internet, who are not on social media, who don't really listen to podcasts. Like books is like physical. It could be in the bookstore and it's going to be around like what you said, like for years and years. And I love that you are leaving this legacy about, nursing and what we do in our profession and what we can do outside of nursing. And speaking of that, what would you say, who is Sara outside of the nursing, career, nursing profession?
Oh, that's such a good question. And no one has ever asked me that before. So, part of the reason I do this is because the reason that I became an entrepreneur is that I'm just looking for better balance in my life. So I actually really enjoy traveling. I enjoy trying different kinds of food. I enjoy doing yoga and Pilates. Like that's the kind of stuff I like to do. So, and I like to learn a lot. I just like to go and read about certain things and I go down a lot of rabbit holes. Like right now, the Olympics are going on and I'm obsessed with Simone Biles. So I
Yeah.
actually really love gymnastics. That's something that I used to do in my childhood and I want to get back
Oh,
into it again. I know as an adult it's different, but I want to get back into that kind of
yeah.
thing. So yeah, I like doing those things and I like running. So I do long distance running. I sign up for a race every year.
Oh.
Yeah, I just like to challenge myself, and that's one thing that I've always wanted to do, right? I always wanted to try new things and push myself a little bit.
Oh, I love that. And it's so nice to hear that because my whole feed right now is like when I scroll on social media, it's all about like gymnastics. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so cool to hear that you also did that. Like I would have
Mm-hmm.
never, like, because these are things that you don't normally post in your platform, in your social media. And one thing that I like to really highlight when I get guests in here is to also highlight who they are, outside of nursing, because we are more than just, we're not just a nurse. We're not only a nurse, but we are way more than just a nurse, is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying. There's so many personalities, so many interests outside of nursing that people need to also realize when they come across like a nurse, is that this is not all we do. Like, we like to do other things too. So how can my audience or our listeners you connect with you, network with you, because you are such a great inspiration, not only to me, but I think for anyone who will be listening to this podcast, like just like listening to your journey and just like your mind and how your brain works when it comes to this kind of things. How are we able to connect with you?
I have a few different hats. So I do have a personal website. It's sarafung.com. So Sarah with no H,
Mhm.
Fung.com. And then for my resume business, you can find me at thernresume.com. That's all one word. For the podcast, it's grittynurse.com. And so if you do want to listen to the podcast, it's on all the major podcast platforms. We also have a YouTube channel. So that's probably the main ways you can find me. I am on social media, but I think there's too many accounts to name. Or you could just Google me. That's an easy way as well. So I'm kind of, my main platform right now is LinkedIn, but I also am on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I'm playing a little bit around with TikTok, and X, which is Twitter, but now
Yeah.
X. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
All of these links are going to be in our show notes. That way you can connect with Sarah. I really enjoyed talking with you, Sarah. I could go on too, because I would love to learn more about like LinkedIn and how you can leverage that to grow in your career as a nurse and also as a business owner. But I'll probably have you again in the podcast. But thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, what would be your last tip? If you can give like one actionable tip for like a nurse who's like listening today, what would it be?
I think what I say a lot is that your resume it's like what you wear, right? So when someone first sees you, they make an impression within the first 10 seconds of meeting you. And that is what a resume is, right? So someone might only glance at it for 10 seconds. And so you really want to be impactful with what you write, and you really want to use the job description as kind of a guide to highlight what you want to highlight. And I guess one last thing I would say is the only goal really of a resume is to get an interview. It's not to get a job, it's to get an interview. So if you can keep that in mind and realize that people have short attention spans, I think that will help too.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I hope you guys like enjoyed this podcast. I will see you guys again in the next one.
Thanks so much for having me.